Thank you, Madam Chair, for those very kind comments at the beginning, and I will reciprocate here in a minute with some also. And good morning, Secretary Jewell. We're very pleased to have you appear before the subcommittee to discuss the Department of Interior's fiscal year 2017 budget request. I'm also pleased to welcome Deputy Secretary Mike Connor and Deputy Assistant Secretary Chris Sari before the subcommittee. Before we turn to the budget, I want to thank Chairman Murkowski for working with me to produce what I think is a very good budget for the department in 2016. Madam Chairman, we've had some challenging policy issues to work through, so I'm very pleased that we were able to pass a bill that included critical increases for national parks, tribal programs, the Land and Water Conservation Fund, and many of the programs that we'll discuss this morning. I also want to recognize, Madam Chair, your hard work and your leadership of this subcommittee. I know it will be a pleasure to work with you again this year and to work with your very fine staff to support our common interests in this bill. That said, this subcommittee's job is not going to be easy. Under the Budget Control Act, discretionary spending for non-defense programs is essentially flat in 2017. At the same time, we have to fund certain must-do increases across the government, including firefighting and tribal contract support costs for this subcommittee. So that flat funding level effectively means a cut. On paper, the department's discretionary request also looks flat compared to fiscal year 2016 in keeping with the budget caps. But if you dig a little deeper, it's clear that the President used savings from a number of proposals to create room for some significant increases. These proposals include funding part of the firefighting budget with a new disaster cap authorization and providing mandatory funding for the payment in lieu of taxes program. In fact, when you factor in all the sources of funding, this budget is really a 2% increase overall for the department. I like many of the increases that this budget proposes. It provides a 9% increase for our national parks and a 5% increase for the Bureau of Indian Affairs to support tribal education and social service needs. And I couldn't agree, Chairman Murkowski, with you more, talking about the dire state of and the dire situation in Indian country in terms of education. This budget also expands on the increases that we provided in the 2016 omnibus to the Land and Water Conservation Fund. It proposes $475 million for LWCF programs funded by this bill and proposes to transition the program to its full authorized level of $900 million in future years. There are many important increases as well for wildlife refuges, energy development, science and climate change programs, all very important investments. But let's be clear, since funding is tight, our ability to fund many of these increases depends on getting agreement to reform the wildland firefighting budget and enacting a long-term mandatory funding source for payment in lieu of the payment in lieu of taxes program. Until we're successful in enacting those changes, we will have to prioritize what we fund very carefully, and that means very tough trade-offs. The budget also includes some important legislative proposals I expect we will discuss today. In particular, I want to applaud the administration's leadership to reform energy and mining activities on public lands and make sure that taxpayers are getting a fair return from the development of those lands. I'm pleased to see that your budget addresses hard rock mining reforms, including setting a fair royalty for mining operations on public lands and proposing a hard rock abandoned mine fee to address legacy cleanup issues. I've also sponsored legislation to take on this issue. We need real mining reform, and we have needed it for a long time. It makes no sense that we still rely on an antiquated law that is nearly 150 years old as the framework for mining in this country. Events like the Gold King mine disaster should serve as a wake-up call for all of us. We have to get serious about cleaning up abandoned mines. There are abandoned toxic mine sites throughout the West. These mines are ticking time bombs. They're releasing a slow-motion stream of lead, arsenic, cadmium, and toxins into water supplies, water we need for drinking, irrigation, and recreation. The cleanup costs are absolutely astronomical. I've seen estimates between $9 and $21 billion. In New Mexico alone, the cost is estimated between $385 and $840 million. Today's mining industry has much better standards, but this toxic legacy cannot be left unaddressed. The damage has been done, and taxpayers should not be left holding the bag for the mess, as well as for future cleanup costs. The cost of inaction on mining reform has been too great already. We can't afford to wait, and it's time that we act. You are doing the right thing, Secretary Jewell, and I want to work with you to enact common sense reforms. Thank you again for appearing before us. Look forward to hearing your testimony and having a good discussion and dialogue. Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Jewell, I'm pleased to see that you've proposed a 9% increase for national parks, including major investments in construction and maintenance programs to address the estimated $11.9 billion maintenance backlog at parks nationwide. It's mind-boggling, that number. We have a particular issue with park maintenance in New Mexico I want to briefly raise. The public elevators at Carlsbad Caverns National Park have been out of service since early November, leaving visitors to hike in and out of the caverns if they want to visit. Obviously, the lack of elevator service creates a problem for visitors who have accessibility issues, as well as a problem for the general public. I've had the chance to raise this issue with you personally, and you know how important it is to me for the Park Service to restore temporary elevator service at the park as soon as possible, and to come up with a plan to permanently upgrade the elevators. I appreciate you working with me on this to resolve this issue as quickly as possible and to ensure that the local communities know what to expect. I'd also like to thank you for your strong support of the Valles Caldera National Preserve during its recent transition to become part of the National Park System. I'm also pleased to note that you have included $3.3 million in your budget request to continue funding for the preserve into 2017. Now that you've visited, I know you'll agree with me that the preserve is one of the crown jewels of the National Park System. What makes it so special is not such a stunning landscape, however. There's recreation, hunting, fishing, and grazing at Valles Caldera, and all those make it a vibrant part for New Mexico's community and for our local economies. That's why I'm concerned to hear that the Park Service is still weighing whether to continue traditional grazing permits on the preserve for this upcoming season. The law that transferred the Valles Caldera to the National Park Service allows these long-standing permits to remain in place while the Park Service develops its long-term management policies. These ranchers deserve to know now that they can count on their grazing permits for this season. Can I have your commitment that you'll work with me and other members of the congressional delegation who are also very concerned about this to resolve this issue quickly and to avoid any further disruption to these traditional grazing permits?
Certainly, Senator, we will be happy to engage directly with you, and Park Service is well aware of the need to act fast on this. I'll say that there are some complexities. An endangered species, for example, that needs to be incorporated in their planning process, and figuring out the market rates and appropriate grazing fees. But we are very happy to work with your office to to keep the priority high for the Park Service.
Great, thank you very much. And I think on the endangered species issues, there are areas where there aren't endangered species issues, and I think the park superintendent is very aware of those and the local people on the ground. Another issue related to the transition of the Valles Caldera is the importance of continuing a multi-year stewardship contract with the Jemez Pueblo. This project supports vital landscape restoration work and jobs for tribal members. As you know, I work to include $1.5 million in the 2016 omnibus to support forest restoration projects at new parks like Valles Caldera. Could you tell me what work you expect to accomplish this year with the funding we provided Is funding included in your 2017 budget to continue this effort?
So the short answer is yes, funding is included, and it's going to be used for thinning about 1,200 acres of forest. And as we're both aware, they had devastating forest fires, and that's really important. So that will continue.
Great. Thank you very much for that response. As you know, I'm very supportive of the department's efforts to develop new rules related to methane venting and flaring. New Mexico's natural resources provide jobs and royalty payments that are an important part of our state's economy, but outdated requirements are resulting in over $100 million worth of natural gas being wasted, which has cost my state $43 million in lost royalties since 2009. There is also a serious health component to this issue. I understand that you are now in the public comment period on the methane venting and flaring rule. Could you give us a sense of the timeline for the final rule? What are some of the issues you are hearing from industry that you believe will be addressed in the final rule?
Well, at this point, the public comment period ends next month on April 8th. And so far, we've had 2 public listening sessions, one in Farmington, New Mexico, the other in Oklahoma City. So I'll be taking input on all of those comments. I can't tell you what all of them are because we haven't analyzed them yet. I'm sure you're aware of what some of them are in terms of cost and methodology and importance of doing this. But once we have all of those comments in, we'll be happy to analyze them and factor that into the rulemaking.
Great, thank you very much. And I have a question here on coal, but that one is kind of like beating a dead horse. And Senator Wyden and I have a piece of legislation on that, and I think I'll submit that one for the record. I'm very pleased that this subcommittee was able to provide an 85% increase for Indian school construction and improvements in the 2016 omnibus. That amount includes funds to finish the schools on the 2004 school construction priority list. It also provides a down payment to begin work on new schools that is BIE is in the process of selecting. I'm glad that you were able to include another $45 million for replacement school construction in your 2017 budget. I know that BIE is currently considering applications for schools that want to be considered for the next round of funding. There are 4 schools in New Mexico that are currently competing for a place on the final list, and they are all very anxious to find out whether they will get selected. In addition, this subcommittee needs to know how the funds in your budget will be used so that we can support your efforts during the appropriations process. When do you expect to finalize your new school construction list, and what is your plan for providing the subcommittee with more detail on how your 2017 budget request will align with that list?
The Indian Affairs team is hard at work, and they're nearing finalizing the list. We narrowed the list down from many schools to 10 that submitted additional information. That has been received, it's being analyzed, and I would expect sometime in the coming weeks to see the final version of the list for the new school construction. There's also replacement buildings, which will be considered afterwards. And so we're very happy to provide you with information on how the funding would be used. And I think we're happy to work with the committee and provide you with an inventory of that. But as you pointed out, this is a much bigger issue than we have money in the budget to address. We can just begin to chip away at the list and work on stemming the increase in deferred maintenance, but we need a longer-term solution, as happened with the Department of Defense schools, to really address this long-term systemic problem, which is afflicting fully a third of our schools that are considered in poor condition, including a bunch of them in your state.
Thank you, and I know you have a real passion for this. Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Jewell, an issue of serious importance for tribes in New Mexico is the repatriation of sacred objects back to the tribes. First, I want to applaud your recent efforts to work with French authorities to seek cooperation in these efforts. As you know, these items are not pieces of art to be sold. They are sacred objects that are deeply important for tribal identity. And what's more, it's illegal to traffic these items within the United States. I think we need to be doing more to crack down on the sales of these priceless cultural objects. One idea I've heard from the Pueblo of Acoma is to establish an antiquities unit within the BIA to investigate these kinds of cases. I want to work with you to ensure that BIA and other bureaus within the department have the ability to put a stop to these illegal trafficking efforts. Can you elaborate on the work of the department in terms of bringing awareness to this issue and preventing tribal objects from being trafficked? And are there specialized law enforcement resources within the department able to handle these repatriation cases?
Well, Senator, this is a significant issue. And when I was in Paris as part of the climate talks, I met with the Minister of Justice for France, and I also met with the individual that administers the auction houses in France. They typically produce a catalog with a number of these items that are exactly as you described. They are not works of art. They are critical artifacts that were removed from the tribes for whatever means many, many decades ago and have been circulating in the art market. They do not provide sufficient time for the tribes to even know their, let alone take the kind of action that the French authorities say that they need. So I was met with a very sympathetic voice in the Minister of Justice. Unfortunately, she just quit, so we'll have to start over again with the next minister. I do think that there was a path forward that we learned about the repatriation of Nazi articles taken in Nazi Germany from families at that time that may be a path that we can use. So on the international market, I would say that the State Department is a critical ally in this effort, and they have the people that work the legal systems there. I would say that to dedicate someone from BIA's law enforcement to this is something that would have to come out of another area of BIA's law enforcement, so it's a trade-off given the law enforcement challenges we have in Indian country. But I do think the BLM has some capabilities in this area. I know the State Department, Interpol, the international organizations do, so it's on our agenda to raise awareness internationally to see if we can actually address this. I will also say we're not without fault. Our auction houses in New York City, for example, do trade in artifacts, and they may be those that are inappropriate to trade in, and we don't find out about it until late. So this is a very, very important, and the New Mexico tribes are quite active in this, but so are the Alaska tribes as well. It's important, and thanks for raising visibility with us.
Thank you for your efforts on that. As you know, we've had extensive discussions, and I know the Chairman has also been involved in these on this reorganization of the Bureau of Indian Education. And I understand the department is now moving forward with the first phase of the proposed reorganization of the BIE, including the establishment of new educational resource centers, that your 2017 budget anticipates additional changes to the Bureau. This subcommittee supports your efforts to improve education for Native students, and we recognize that you are tackling some of the very tough issues as you overhaul the Bureau. But I want to make sure that the reorganization is done right and actually leads to concrete improvements in the classroom. I also want to make sure that stakeholders at all levels, from tribal governments to educators and parents, understand clearly what to expect from these changes. As part of the first phase of the reorganization, you have proposed a number of staffing changes, including changes to the regional office in Albuquerque to create these new centers to assist BIE and tribally controlled schools. What is your timeline for staffing up these centers, and what services can schools expect to receive starting in the fall? And what is your plan to ensure that all stakeholders, including BIE employees whose jobs may be affected, know what to expect during the reorganization? And there are other questions there that I'll submit for the record, but I want to get an answer from you on those.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to give you a quick update. I'll also say that taking on reorganization of something as storied and not in necessarily a good way as the BIE is, from a business person's perspective, unbelievably difficult over a multi-year period of time and extraordinarily difficult in the time frame I've got left. So the goal is to set a path forward so that we continue to make progress on Indian education reform. It's not all going to be done in 1 year. We do, however, we've had multiple meetings with all employees. Those were held in February that outlined the whole process. On February 22nd, so just a week or so ago, we announced 65 vacancy announcements across the BIE. Some of them are vacant, some are new positions. People will reapply. Those positions will close on March 11th, and we'll begin filling the jobs in April. So it's really a fast timeline. I would say what you'll see in terms of near-term improvements, we've been working now for more than a year on professional development of teachers aligned with Common Core. We have been providing training for effective school boards, financial accountability training for school leadership, and then training for certain tribes that have wanted alternative accountability standards like the Miccosukee and the Navajo. So there is a lot of work going on. I've personally met with leadership of the BIE to see how it's going. We have a lot of work to do, but I would say that people understand the importance of this. I think people are now maybe a bit more reassured that all their jobs aren't in jeopardy, and we're working toward a common end, which is better education for these students and better self-determination in education by tribal communities that want to take control of the schools. So continue to have an open door to any suggestions that you have in this regard, but we're well on our way.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your hard work on that. Since Senator Murkowski mentioned her father, just as a closing comment here, when we were talking about the Land and Water Conservation Fund, as you know, and Senator Tester asked a question, as you know, my father worked in the 1960s when he was Secretary of Interior to start the Land and Water Conservation Fund. He worked with the Congress. He went down and I believe met with a congressman by the name of Wilbur Mills from Arkansas, and they came up with the idea of taking offshore oil and gas, and with it, knowing that these resources are limited, and taking some of it and dedicating it to permanent protection of land. And the original idea, I think, came from a national commission, a blue ribbon panel, an incredible panel that looked, headed by, I think, Lawrence Rockefeller and others, that said, what do we need to do in terms of parks? And the suggestion was from this commission, these were people outside of politics, you should spend $1 billion a year. And everybody should know you're going to spend that. It's split up between the state program, as you talked about, and the federal program. And the reason you do that is everybody can plan. All these city councils and states and the federal government and its agencies can all plan and look to see that that money's there. And as Senator Tester pointed out, we've now reached the point where we authorized it at that level. The money's over there in the fund, but somehow we don't dedicate the resources there. So we're all trying to figure out how we got to this place. And I know President Obama and you have encouraged us now to move forward. I thank very much Senator Murkowski for working with me on the increase that happened in Land and Water Conservation Fund. That was a good step, but we're not anywhere near we need to be in terms of the original idea behind the Land and Water Conservation Fund. But thank you very much.